You do? Okay.
Yep.
We're good. I'm
I
going to
was
try
in
out my
my,
headphones.
yeah, I'm afraid to put mine back in now. So,
Give me one sec.
yeah, sorry about that.
It's all good. You got me, though?
I hear you great. Yep.
All right, beautiful. We're in
All right,
business.
cool. All right, so let's get rolling. So I don't want to delay. First of all, where are you?
I'm in Florida, down in
You're in Florida.
Jupiter. Yep.
Okay.
So,
And so at this stage, like, how much of your time is your own stuff? How much is Yankees time? Or is it,
I think it kind of depends day to day. Some days it's really intensive on one and on the other. Certainly when I'm in, it was a running joke when I was in Tampa for spring training. Every hotel room I stayed with had like a nice view of the Tampa harbor, and I didn't actually see it once because I would be at out the door by 6 and usually back after dark. So those are some long days with a lot of work at night on my own, and then when I'm back here, it's a little bit lighter, obviously, because there's not quite as much one-on-one interaction with players. So it's
right, exactly.
yeah, it's hills and valleys.
Cool. So basically, this is long story how this come up since we got started late. I don't want to waste time, but I'm just kind of talking with a bunch of people like you. It's really for me. I'll share some stuff with my players, and then I'll send out some stuff, just like I did with Blakey. I'll make sure that you obviously approve of anything that's going
Cool.
out. So,
that's all good.
You can feel comfortable talking about a player, and I'm not going to be airing anything along those. But
okay, cool.
Just out of curiosity, because this is how my mind works. What does Eric Cressey do for his workouts?
I'm in the gym in some capacity, 6 days a week. It's usually kind of 2 upper body, 2 lower body strength training sessions, and then usually one kind of like aerobic base session, which is more of a feel good recovery one, and then usually I'll get out and I'll sprint 1 day a week too. So there's some mixing and matching there, and but that's kind of something that's worked for me pretty well for a long time.
And like, is your aerobic thing inside, or do you get outside for it?
I would say more often than not, it's just a bike or like rowing machine. But you never know. There'll be days when if I'm feeling banged up for whatever reason, it might just be a really long walk with an audiobook or something like that. So it's and that's the one I can usually have a little bit of wiggle room on if I'm traveling or something like that. It's easier to get that one in.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't want to talk about my stuff at all, but I did my first ever Ironman last year.
Oh, nice.
Really, going into 2019, I didn't even really swim at all. So it was a fascinating thing at my age, which was 40. I really did it because I was turning 50, and I just got into the pool and I sucked and I sucked and I sucked, and it just so exciting to kind of learn something new at an older age, And the one thing I'll tell you, because now I was doing CrossFit while the place is open, but run, bike, swim, lift, maybe yoga here and there, but the best part of swimming, I'm not trying to sell you on it, is you could be in that pool for an hour, come out, you feel like you've done nothing.
That's wild.
It doesn't beat the crap out of your body, which I really like.
Yeah.
Like I ran this morning and I'll feel the run all day, but the swim, you don't feel it.
Oh, it's true. There's zero impact. It's a game changer, no doubt about it.
All right. So just, again, as much as you feel like elaborating, what influenced you, if you're aware of, to go down this road in the first place? I mean, did you get hurt? Were you a weak kid? Like, what got you on this path whenever that path started?
Yeah, it's kind of multifactorial. I would say the first part of it, I was actually, believe it or not a baseball player. I finished playing in 8th grade, and I was actually more of a soccer and a tennis player. So during my high school career, basically, I had aspirations of playing college soccer. Really was kind of known as the guy who had good ball skills, understood the game really well, distributed the ball well, things like that. Not exactly the most athletic guy. I was a little heavier set and didn't run well and all that. So, I was kind of recruited in spite of my athleticism, you could say. So I was a Division III athlete at best. But when I was recruited, that was something that kind of kept coming up. And I, senior year in high school, kind of flipped the switch, learned to eat right, train a little bit harder, and change things around. And believe it or not, what actually wound up happening is the pendulum swung pretty far in the other direction. So I actually wound up with kind of eating disorder / exercise addiction, and lost about 80 pounds my senior year in high school. So what wound up being hyper motivated to play college sports wound up taking college sports away from me. So I spent my first couple of years in college actually, just trying to get healthy. Get my weight back to a normal range and learn how to take care of myself. And that's really where I fell in love with training the right way. And I was fortunate to have a good mentor in my hometown who owned a gym, and he kind of introduced me to the kind of the fitness industry gave me my first opportunity, just working the front desk, and, one thing led to another. But the other kind of aside to that was my tennis career kind of came to a gradual end because of a shoulder injury. So I had always taken like kind of a special interest in the upper extremity, and, working to avoid surgery myself. And, those things kind of coincided over the course of like a 2 to 4 year span between undergrad and graduate school. And I wound up going to the University of Connecticut to do my graduate degree in exercise science. And when I was there, Brajesh Patel, who I think you guys probably know each other.
Very well.
Yeah. So I'll never forget, I went to UConn, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to study something, but it could have been research. It could have been, clinical exercise physiology, a lot of things. And I'll never forget, I just started to write a little bit, and Brajesh read one of my articles, and he came up to me one day, and we had some grad classes together. He's like, "Hey, I really enjoyed that. If you ever want to come down, like, check out the weight room, watch me with the team, anything like that, just let me know." And he's like, "I got baseball tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. And it was almost like he was testing me, and I didn't realize it until 10 years later when I looked back on it. But I remember going and watching Brajesh work with the baseball guys at UConn at, the crack of dawn and on campus and stores, and instantly kind of realized that was what I wanted to do. It was a turning point for me, and I fell in love with strength and conditioning, and was fortunate to have some good mentors, and Chris West and Tina Murray, at the University of Connecticut. And one thing led to another, and, here I am. Well, that was 2005. I graduated from my grad degree. So
that's what I was going to ask you. That was about with him.
Yeah. So 15 years ago was kind of when it all started. And, I went to the private sector after I was done with grad school, and, led to us ultimately opening the facility up in Massachusetts. And then that was 2007. Then the facility in Florida opened in 2014. And it just so happened that some of the first guys we worked with in the private sector were baseball guys, and they were high school guys. And we kind of lucked out. We had a year in 2007 when, basically the 4 guys I started off with when I moved to Massachusetts, they won a state championship. One of them won state player of the year. A couple of them went to play Division I baseball, and my phone started ringing off the hook. And, so we built kind of this little high school crew, and then the high school crew became the college crew, and some became pro guys. They had teammates, they had agents. There was just a lot of word of mouth that grew the business. And, here we are 15 years later, and basically we've got guys in every organization. And it's funny, we have staff members almost now in every organization. People have been former interns, and, people who've been on staff that have been hired in various places. So it's cool to see it kind of go in that direction.
So I guess a follow-up would be, that was really cool. That was a great, and I didn't know a lot of that stuff. So that's kind of why I like doing this. I get to, I don't know if you've told that story 1,000 times, or whether you don't tell it that often, but that was cool to hear. What do you think in your own mind? Like, I think if you walk in down the street and you see a high school baseball player, and you say, who's probably the most well-known strength and conditioning coach in the country, I think they're going to say you. So are you this is a silly question. Are you that good? Or do you bring something different in terms of like research and looking at it more from a clinical way than maybe your standard guy who's got a place around the corner? I mean, what do you think is your specialty?
Yeah, I think if I had to put one word on it, I think what differentiates us is our synergy. And if you actually think about it kind of logically, is crazy. It sounds we work with teams, but we've also effectively competed with them for players for all this time that we've been around. In the off season, particularly nowadays, you have these beautiful spring training complex. If you've been to like the Rockies and the Diamondbacks facility, it's unreal. I mean, it's like a paradise in Scottsdale in the off season. So
right.
To some degree, we had to compete with that. And we're not going to have Major League Baseball, I think, was a $12 billion industry last year. We're not going to compete with them on cash flow. There's no doubt about it. Like, it's not going to be pristine amenities and those things. But what players we can over deliver with is how we communicate, the expertise that we bring, and more importantly, how we tie all those things together, how our communication, our expertise are interwoven between the skill coaches, the strength coaches, the physical therapy, the massage therapist, the nutrition guy, all that. And it sounds crazy to say, but that's something that's shockingly lacking in professional baseball, but also, if we're being honest, like college baseball, because of the challenges of how many hours you can work with a player, staff turnover, people going from one organization to another. So that, looking back, was, I think, one of the maybe competitive advantages we had, is we had good staff continuity. We had a small group where we would always communicate really, really closely. And, it was interesting because it actually became a model that we started teaching. Actually, Blake and myself and Eric Schoenberg, our physical therapist, who's now down in Florida with me, the three of us started doing our baseball mentorships because we realized this wasn't happening elsewhere. The strength coaches and the pitching coaches and the ATs and things like that, they weren't necessarily communicating like they need to, but it wasn't necessarily that they weren't well intentioned. It was that they didn't know how to speak the same language.
Great point, man.
Yeah.
Great point.
And as and to be honest, that's been one of the biggest things that I've really worked on early in the Yankees organization, is getting everybody communicating so that our scouts understand some of the things that we talk about from a skill development or a strength conditioning or a postural standpoint, and that our skill development folks understand exactly what it is scouts are reporting, so that we're all at least we're speaking the same language.
Okay, so that was a huge, really informative. I like that. I mean, I think of my own world as a Division I pitching coach, and the trainer and the strength coach, we certainly get along, but I don't think what you said something really that struck me in there. We don't speak the same language. I mean, there's definitely, I can look at a guy and say, he can't post up on his front side like he needs to. Something might be going on in his hip or hamstring, but I may not be saying it, or they're not looking at it in that same way. So I guess I wanted to ask you another question too, is I've seen some of your speeches at different things and read a lot of your stuff, and know that when it comes to overhand throwing, you've forgotten more than I'll know about what's going on in the shoulder and elbow. Do you consider yourself a pitching guy, or do you work with pitchers specifically on their mechanics? I mean, hope I'm not asking a question that offends you. Like, I don't know.
No, it's not. I would joke that I probably know enough to be dangerous. I think I've earned the right to be in that room, and that's taken a long time. I mean, I joke. Kurt Schilling was actually our first big leaguer. It was in 2008-ish, I want to say. And, basically 2008, he had a pretty invasive shoulder surgery. And as we're working our way back, I'll never forget, we were kind of talking about the plan of attack, if he was going to, really make a run at this. He's talking about going to Arizona and doing like a training camp and throwing for teams and this, that, and the other. And he's like, "You do PFPs, right?" I'm like, "What's that?" I had no idea what PFP means.
Right.
So, so like that's 12 years ago. So I had to really get outside my comfort zone and learn a lot of that stuff. And, sure enough, this morning, actually, before we got on the call, I was watching basically a defensive metrics presentation that our analytics department pulled together for us. So you have to be very comfortable getting outside your realm of expertise. So with respect to the pitching coach conversation, I think I can be in that room and I can actually be really impactful for a lot of guys. What I would tell you though, is the way we've structured our staff, I don't need to be that guy. We have great guys in both. Obviously, Blake, served that role for 7 years before he moved on. And so, we basically created a scenario where it wasn't necessarily the best use of my time. And, we joke about that. I've always wanted to get a massage therapy degree just so that I can do more hands-on stuff with guys and use palpation skills and things like that. But we have Chris Howard in Massachusetts and we have Shane Ryan in Florida. We have two amazing manual therapists. So it's more about we've created a system where everybody can really leverage their strengths heavily. But, I can be in on those conversations and hopefully impart some, some thoughts that help the outcome for the player.
Okay. So that's a really good answer. And I have a lot of these questions and they're just kind of flowing naturally. And I guess one would be, what does, Cressey Performance, you get a 14, 15, 16-year-old shows up for the first time and says, I just want to pitch better. What is the process that either you specifically or your group would do? And on that note, either me as a pitching coach with younger kids or my college kids, my own son who is like, "Oh my God, you're talking to Cressey." He's all excited that I got, I said, "Cressey's talking to me too." But no, just joking. What is the first step to getting a 15 or 16-year-old or a college freshman better from your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll use an example. So we get a lot of our facilities are out of town consults, and we're fortunate now to have the capability from, a pitching standpoint to do some critical evaluation of them, in light of the facilities we have. So, let's say, probably best example, I'll use our college development program because we'll get some 17-year-olds that roll in on that. So how we would onboard that crew in our college development program, usually on day one, everything starts with a conversation, right? So my business partner, Pete, or my wife, Anna, here in Florida, will usually, kind of prospect someone to get a feel for injury history and things like that ahead of time, just so we know which staff member is going to take it. So it's crazy involved knee history, my business partner, Shane, down here might take it. If it's someone with a, post-op shoulder or whatever it is, I'm going to handle it. So we kind of prospect them ahead of time so we can hit the ground running. First day is obviously going to go over health history, training background, look at injury history, any related medications they may be on. And a lot of that like preliminary stuff, kind of, sets the stage for just sit down and have a conversation. So we'll start out in the office and we'll discuss goals, what they worked on, what they struggle with. And, that can go down a skill development rabbit hole where it's, hey, my slider's terrible, I can't backspin a four seam, whatever it may be. But it'll also go down I've had this training experience in the past, like, hey, they run us a lot at our college, I've had a hard time keeping weight on. So we can go in that direction. And then we'll start in the office with a thorough movement assessment. It'll be postural in nature, shirtless. We'll look at scapular positioning. We'll look at, obviously core control, single leg balance, push up, shoulder flexion and abduction and external rotation. We'll do some manual muscle tests. And then we'll get them out on the floor and we'll actually go through some more classic, like orthopedic range of motion tests on the table. And then we'll do some more general screens as well, where, you're looking like an overhead squat, overhead lunge walk, toe touch. So I'd say that assessment, is both general and specific. And then it's also descriptive without being predictive, right? So, we want to just describe the way they move and not necessarily say, hey, this poor single leg, drill is going to mean that you can't post up on your front leg when you're throwing downhill, right? So you want to meet them where they're at. But I think the other thing is there's both an objective and a subjective component, right? So yes, this athlete has 125 degrees of external rotation, but there are also going to be things that are maybe a little bit more subjective, like doesn't reverse his lumbar curve well when he does a toe touch, where you're looking at, does he get the right amount of motion from certain joints relative to others? And then from there, what I actually like to do on the first day of that program with our guys, which is, a lot of people would, I guess, roll their eyes at or, question, but I want to see how they warm up. I want to see a self-selected warm up, because you'd be shocked at how many of these guys do like a couple arm circles and like, ugly J-band. There's always like the cross body stretch, right?
Oh my God.
I'm like, God, you might as well have just done that. You could have done 10 jumping jacks and been more ready than that. But we see that a lot. So for me, that's kind of like the tripwire where it tells us that these guys have really taken their prep seriously. And more often than not, it's, if it's a kid who's 6'4", 175 pounds, like soaking wet, and, he's got a terrible warm, he just is like a newborn horse. He just needs some direction and some consistency. But what I do like to do with those guys is on that first day, we'll throw a pen. So we'll video it. We'll get Rapsodo on it. So we'll get the high-speed camera, obviously, as well to look a little bit deeper on it. I'm starting to do some stuff with Hit Tracks with some of their new pitching stuff here this summer as well. But what I actually like to do is we'll throw a first inning, and then we'll do some kind of intervention. So say, for instance, that athlete's got a really flat thoracic spine and limited shoulder flexion. We might do a positional breathing drill and then just some mobilizations into shoulder flexion just to like get some lat length. And then we'll put them back out there for a second round and we'll see how things change. And that way it kind of drives our interventions. And sometimes the intervention will make guys better, right? You give them some mobility that they couldn't tap into, or even some like motor control in the range of motion they already have. You also see sometimes where guys get substantially worse because it's something they need is more of a chronic adaptation, because acutely you've given them range of motion they can't control, or, you fatigued them when their work capacity isn't good. So it kind of is just a little opportunity to look at some stuff. Obviously from like our analytics, we're going to be able to tell spin rate, spin efficiency, get it a little bit of a feel for what their arsenal actually looks like, how well they command it. So I think what it gives you is it gives you this opportunity to put the movement assessment side by side with the skill specific assessment. Yeah. Where you say, hey, this guy looked terrible on his overhead lunge walk, and that's why he's spinning out of his front leg instead of kind of like, basically riding that bike into the curb, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and it's fun too, because it's a very like synergistic environment, right? So like, me and our pitching guys and our other strength coaches, even our nutrition guys, like after we do all those assessments, it's honestly, it's very comparable to what we do in Yankees spring training with our big league roster.
Just a different level of kid.
Yeah, you take, I think in our big league camp, we had 62 or 63 guys this year with the Yankees. I think we were 42 in this college program. And we literally sat down at a staff meeting, 2 days later, and everyone who did an assessment writes down, here are the high priority items for this person. Here's what you need to work on. And I think what you're just dealing with is you're dealing with a different caliber of athlete, obviously. You're dealing with a guy who's throwing at 81 to 84 instead of 92 to 95. I'd say one thing that was very surprising about our college crew, I'm curious if you've experienced this as well, is I was shocked at how few guys actually know how to spin a baseball, like how to impart force to a four seam. I think we had 2 guys out of 42 that actually could spin a baseball at 2,000 RPMs, which is, a couple hundred RPMs below major league average. And all these guys, if you asked on their questionnaires, were saying, I'm here for velocity. I'm here for velocity. I'm like, hey, I understand how to actually throw a four seam. There's probably a lot of velocity there if you get your spin efficiency where it needs to be.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think one of the things, and I'm going to definitely ask you some things I think I could do better, but one of the things we do is a pretty solid arm care program, which includes forearm and wrist and hand. And, that has a lot to do with it, right?
Yeah.
A lot of these guys can work out the full body, but elbow to fingertips, they're not doing a whole lot too. So I think that's definitely a big piece of it. But the Rapsodo is something that I'm starting to use and really starting to learn. How do you improve a pitch or develop a pitch with the Rapsodo? So I think that's a really cool, piece of that too. It's interesting to see that you guys use that. So one question kind of out of that too is, if you were to, have your absolutes, like the things that are crucial, let's just even go with what you just talked about that warm up. Because I do the same thing. If I get somebody in a camp or a little lesson, I just say, let me see the warm up. And just like you said, it's amazing. And you really can tell a lot about them, how they warm up.
Yeah.
How seriously they are, because the way they warm up is a lot of times going to be the way they pitch, probably the way they do their studies and all that, their attention to detail and all that. But for you, and I'm going to ask this, if you will, from, let's just say, the college standpoint, what are some key things one must do with their body in a warm-up capacity to be ready to pitch in a game?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, warm-ups are there for a number of reasons, right? Above all else, it's got to get body temperature up. Like, we know that there's something to be said about that, and that also relates to how we dress, what the temperature we're dealing with. Like, I've heard stories about, like, Wake Forest. I think when they were playing at Boston College, like, they had their bullpen guys waiting on the bus before they went out to warm up. Like, it's smart. You got to do that stuff in the Northeast. You guys know it better than anybody.
Well, we did something this year just to cut it. We started traveling with a hydroculator.
Yeah.
We get to the park, we plug that in, and I'm telling you, we only got 13 games before the season got banged, but those pitchers would run over, and they loved it, man. It just mentally helped them think they're ready to let it flow, that they're not going to be at risk.
So that's huge. I think, warm-ups for me, like, they always have to kind of abide by what we call the proximal to distal approach, meaning let's make sure that what's going on centrally with your core, your thoracic spine, your neck positioning, all that stuff is where it needs to be before we start getting a little bit more distal. So all the hip mobility drills in the world and all of the band exercises aren't going to matter if you're not controlling your core effectively. So we teach that pretty intensely, and that doesn't matter whether it's a 12-year-old or a big leaguer. To me, that's foundational stuff that has some payback down the road. And I think it's hard to say for sure, but I do think there's implications in terms of those guys that kind of run away from their arm and their delivery. Like, it's, in many cases, it's because they've only trained that with every exercise they've done outside of pitching for all those years. So we deal with that with even some of our big league guys. We have to have those conversations. So I'd say the non-negotiables of the warm-up are, A, you got to get the body temperature up, and B, use your warm-up to also optimize patterning, right? So I'll give you an example. Like, Mike King is a kid I've worked with since Mike was a sophomore in high school. He's now with us in the big leagues with the Yankees. And, I've had Mike on my podcast, and we've talked about this a bunch. And Mike's very, very loose, right? So he's a guy who's got some funk to his delivery, right? He's very closed off. Big two-seam guy. So he's got this very cross-body motion. He's got tons and tons of range of motion to work through. So for a guy like Mike, I don't need to worry about creating a whole lot of range and motion as warm-up. It's already there. Like, I could put him out there in 30-degree weather, and he's still going to crush every hip mobility screen on the planet. But what we can do with him is we can give him some exercises that actually kind of give him some reminders of stability. So we teach him how to get into that front hip. He's going to need a little bit more hip and turn rotation to throw that glove side fastball. And we talk about, hey, if you got all this freakish passive external rotation, we got to make sure we turn on your cuff so that it's actually strong, in that laid back position that really matters. So I think it's a very individualized approach based on how stiff they are, right? Guys who are really, really tight, are going to need, to do a lot more to kind of create that extensibility of the tissues. They may need a little bit longer to warm up, whereas your loose jointed guys kind of go right to some of the stability oriented stuff. So I think, you kind of almost have to have two roadmaps. You have to have your loose guys and your tight guys, and understand they're going to be guys that are somewhere in the middle, and then you just plan accordingly.
On that same note, I've been seeing with our team and some other teams that you see more position guys having throwing issues and arm health issues.
Yeah.
And they certainly do, like a lot of times even our college team, we'll do a nice legit warm up that one of the coaches will run or I'll run. And then it's sort of like, all right, now the pitchers are going to go do another 15 minutes to get themselves ready. And then sometimes the position guys just go pick up the ball and start throwing. So do you see, is there a couple of things that you might give a position guy to warm up, based on what you said, upper body or arm to be ready to throw?
Yeah, I think the challenge with them is less so pregame. It's how do you keep it going during the game? You know what I mean? Because you might be a right fielder that, you make 5 or 6 throws between innings and then you stand around for 15 minutes and you got to uncork one at 100%. Right. So, to be honest, especially if you're talking about colder weather climates, the secret with those guys is to never cool off. If you get warm before the game, you kind of need to stay hot. So I like guys that are a little bit antsy, they're always doing some stuff. We always see like the Vanderbilt, like stuff that they do between innings where
I like it. Yeah.
All runs down to the outfield and does some stuff. And obviously that's more like bullpen arms and things like that. But I do think there's a place for it. So what I'll have our guys do is, we'll do a thorough pregame warm up. And then usually like every half inning, just get up and do like 2 or 3 dynamic flexibility drills. Just like kind of move around a little bit, whether it's like a Spider-Man with hip lift and overhead reach. There's just something to get it going. I'll tell you this though, if we're talking about bullpen arms though, most of the time in pro ball now, a lot of your bullpen arms, they're staying in the clubhouse for those first couple of innings, short of a guy who might get called in for a long relief if the starter gets into trouble. But you see a lot of guys who are actually doing a ton of prep work inside. AJ Ramos is a guy who's, he's been a closer in the big leagues, an absolutely awesome guy and a total veteran student of the game. He's actually training with us in Florida as he works his way back from a shoulder issue. And he's a guy who literally has like a really like meticulous routine that he would always do, basically always would start the top of the 5th inning, whether he thought he was going to pitch or not. In worst case scenario, you just get some extra prep work and, work on getting your body in alignment and you get a little extra recovery stuff. But I think that's something that is so important for us to relate to the college and the high school kids is at the highest level. There's actually a ton of prep work going on that you never see when you're at the stadium or when you're watching on TV. It's not everybody, don't get me wrong. There's still guys that are just, crushing a Red Bull and, doing a couple arm circles and throwing 5 warm-up pitches in their game. But there are actually a ton of guys that are really like meticulous about their preparation under the stadium before they ever go out there and do their thing.
It's funny. I still see that again, even at the college level. And I try to get everybody to, take their arm health and body health seriously. But there are some guys that are meticulous about it, and some other guys that are the old. I don't know if you want to call them old school. They're all kids still, but they
old school 21-year-olds.
Exactly. All right, 2 more main questions for you then. One is a general one, and I think what makes you as good as you are is you're very individual. I'm sure the Yankees are not getting all the same program. I'm sure they're getting a lot of individual stuff. But if somebody was, again, a younger kid, didn't really have maybe access to all the things that, a place or the proper person, is there key strength training exercises that you think are foundations that are, whether it's a deadlift, or is there something that in your mind you see as key in the gym movements that someone needs to have?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the young ages, you chase the really low-hanging fruit. And, having great deadlift technique, we'll start guys with the trap bar, just being able to actually load into a hip hinge. That's super important. Whether a pitcher or a hitter, it provides direction from that back hip and, obviously takes a lot of stress off the joints above and below if you can use a powerful mobile joint like the hip the right way. Even just basic like a clean push-up. Like it's shocking to me how many ugly push-ups we see, particularly now that we're in kind of quarantine mode and everybody's doing home workouts. You see some pretty ugly stuff on Instagram, but it's shocking to me like how many guys like you watch them do a push-up and there is like zero movement of the shoulder blades on the rib cage. Everything is just kind of like grinding away through the arm, and there's like aggressive hyperextension of the elbows and forward head posture. So I definitely think something like that's good. Like learning how to do some quality horizontal pulling, like just a good rowing motion where there's good kind of congruency between the ball and the socket throughout. I think a lot of times we see in baseball players, they move too much from the arm and not enough through the shoulder blade on the rib cage. So that's one of the things that we work hard to teach is trying to distribute stress over multiple joints. And if you look at most shoulder injuries we see in the baseball world, it's because you get too much movement of the ball on the socket and not enough of the socket on the rib cage. So we try to play around with that relative stiffness as best we can. And I think the other one's a really, really big one is just single leg strength. Like if, you take an untrained kid, like it sounds crazy to say, but take any high school kid, get him to a 315 trap bar deadlift and get him doing some lunges with an appreciable amount of weight. They're going to be a totally different person. I don't think people realize just what a game changer it is just to have a solid foundation of strength, because we always describe strength as kind of the foundation, right? It's the foundation for power. You can't, apply force quickly if you don't have force to apply in the first place.
Right.
It's the foundation for stability, to stabilize those joints. It's the foundation for the endurance that allows your low back to still feel good after 80 pitches. It's just so important for kind of creating all these foundational things. And not only that, we have a fair amount of, evidence to suggest that it actually may, improve us in terms of like the immunity, resistance to injuries, all these different things that we're trying to create beyond just performance. So, resistance training is a game changer for a young population. And what I think is the most important message in all this is don't wait. Like we joke, I think it was Tim Grover, who's Michael Jordan and Dwayne Wade and Kobe's trainer. He talked about like, never wait around for someone to teach you something you already know. And, what I always kind of just get frustrated with is when you have that 17-year-old kid who's ready to head off to college and he hasn't lifted yet.
Right.
Like, first off, you're making your strength coach's job harder when you actually do get there. But second of all, my gosh, that's the lowest hanging fruit there is. So what I actually love, and I used to be against this, I love getting 12 and 13-year-olds into the facility. Just 2 days a week, foundational stuff, keep it fun, always have options A and B, put games in as part of it. But just teaching them how to do quality movement then is so important, because those guys aren't getting phys ed like they used to. They're not getting a lot of the things that you and I had when we were younger. We didn't, kids aren't just going outside and play because they're so penciled into year-round travel ball and whatever it is. So if you can build a solid strength training foundation at age like 13, I think you're in a really good place. And actually, it's funny. I'd always thought that Mike Boyle, who's super accomplished in this realm, won a World Series in 2013 with the Red Sox. He was actually talking about his own daughter, who I believe won a national championship at Clark as a freshman in hockey. Super talented young player. And he talked about basically like this 2 lifts per week from age 11 on, like basically until age 18. So, what that speaks to is what's the average, that's 7 years, if you're getting in those 2 lifts per week, you're basically looking at like a little over 100 lifts per week, right, per year. So that's 700 lifts. If you got 700 training sessions, even if you do once a week at that younger age, and then maybe it's, 4 times a week in the off season, maybe once a week during the season, sometimes, like, you build yourself this buffer. But more importantly, you've really tapped into some really high level, like, just motor awareness potential. And I look at that and I'm like, man, he nailed it. Whether he realized he nailed it or not, like, that's an absolute game changer. And it's kind of one of the perks, I'm sure, of owning a gym, and your kids are around it all the time. And but I think that's, if there's parents or other coaches on this, like, get kids going, just teach them the right stuff early on, because it's way harder when I get a 17-year-old who's been doing dumb stuff in the basement for 4 years, where you have to undo that stuff. I'd rather just teach them really effectively at a young age.
No, that's a great point. I mean, I'll get some young kids in for a pitching lesson, and at the end, I'll just have them let me see you do 10 push-ups. And a lot of them don't. Also, just to your point, a lot of them don't do push-ups because they're embarrassed that they can't do them.
Yeah.
And then I'll, again, this is so simple and basic, but I say just start at the top of the position and let's control your movement down and use your legs to get back up. But to the proper technique, and that's kind of basically leads to my last question, which is, I've talked to a lot of the people in this realm, and we're talking pitching specific, or we're talking strength specific. I'm still a big believer, as long as I've been doing this, that the mental aspect of it is so crucial to how you perform, to how you learn and actually change something, to your stick-to-itiveness in the weight room. how much do you get into the mental piece, or does that just come with working hard in the weight room?
No, I think it's a huge part of it. And I think there's two avenues through which you can answer this question. The first thing I would say is, a huge mental advantage is knowing that you can trust your preparation, right? You can fall back on your preparation. So, I think to some degree they're inseparable. So if guys prepare hard, they have attention to detail, they're constantly learning, in their training process, they're eating the right stuff, they're getting to bed on time. Everything that we preach, in our realm should give them the confidence that they're more prepared than the guy they're facing, So I think there's that element. I think certainly there are guys that leverage that more. Like, Max Scherzer is a guy that in his mind needs to know he outworked everybody else. And that is whether, the media appreciates it or anybody else, like whether Max even appreciates it, it's a competitive advantage to him. That's always been his thing. And, we'll talk and he'll joke these young bucks don't know, he's like, I'll have a job forever. These young bucks don't know how to prepare, like I've got that edge. So, he says it tongue in cheek, but it's actually something that I think is, he's leveraged well into a successful career. But I do think that, yes, like the mental skills aspect of the game has taken off. I actually did a podcast last night of my own with Mitch Haniger from the Mariners. And we were talking about what mental skills had meant for him. And I brought up the story, Tim Collins, who, Timmy's New England sensation. And, I first met Tim when he was 18, and Tim was he was a tough kid, you know what I mean? He's 5'5", 130 pounds when I met him, but he was a guy who, like, you would have rolled his eyes at any kind of discussion of mental skills. And nowadays, like, he's been through 2 Tommy Johns, he's worked his way back, he's a father of 3, like, he's won a World Series, he's pitched in the World Series. Like, nowadays, like, he developed such a good rapport with the guy they'd have with the Nationals that he really liked, that now when he looks at a free agent opportunity, like, he looks into whether they have a mental skills guy. So it's crazy to think, but this is something that's important to relate to those college guys out there, is like, there's nothing wrong in asking for help on that front, because the best dudes in the game do it and they're good at it. Like, I can't tell you how many really big leaguers I've interacted with who leverage their relationships with the mental skills coach that they have on staff are. I remember talking with Bob Tewksbury just over the course of time. Yeah, Tukes is amazing. And, what I think is the coolest part about Tukes is the buy-in wasn't great when he first got there. It was his presence that over the course of time, built that out to, the point where they had almost nearly 100%, adherence from players. So, like, that's a competitive advantage. And, certainly the people don't always have that amenity right at their fingertips in the high school ranks or, even some of the college programs. So, there's obviously opportunities available, like to work with people in the private sector. I know Tukes does some stuff in that realm. But I would also say, like, there's tons of books that you can read in that realm. That there's, if you're willing to invest the time, and this is the time to do it, right? Like, nobody's playing like, heck, we're I'm with the New York Yankees, we're not playing baseball, nobody's playing baseball. So now's the time to read up, ask good questions, and try to find other ways to improve your game.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. That's all I kind of wanted to talk about. Is I don't know if there's anything that, if again, let's say a standard kid listening to this is 14, 15, if there's anything else you want to impart. Otherwise, I think we covered a lot, so I think I'm pretty happy with that.
No, man, that's good. I think the only thing I would tell those guys is just that nobody realizes how many really good players are out there, and I don't think I ever realized it when I first got into this, and, back in 2007, if you were an 88 to 90 right-handed pitcher, like, you were the bee's knees, you were a top 5 draft pick. And nowadays, like, even as we had 3 or 4 like mid 90s lefties in our free agent class that couldn't get signed about a year ago. It blew my mind. So if there's one thing I would tell those younger guys is, like, get out of your comfort zone. Every guy that I see in pro ball is the best player in the history of their town. And then, you go to pro ball and all of a sudden you don't realize that, there's dozens of guys coming from the Dominican Republic. There's guys coming from Mexico. There's guys coming from Venezuela and Puerto Rico. And, like, you just never appreciate how many good players are out there. So that's the first thing I would say, is, like, you can't at all get comfortable. But the second thing I would also say is there's hope for you, because so area codes, I've been to, area codes with New Balance. They put it on every year. And, obviously it's phenomenal. It's, 230 high school players who are the best in the country. What I'm always intrigued at is when you go and you look at our our crowd. I actually surveyed our big leaguers one day. We had like 41 big league guys that walked in the facility on a daily basis, 2 or 3 off seasons ago. And I was like, hey, did you guys go to area codes? And I would say there was probably a third of them that didn't even know what it was. And then other guys like, nope, I got cut. Nope, didn't even get invited to the tryout. Didn't make it. You'd be shocked. The only guy that I think that day that had made it was Sam Fold. And he was like a New Hampshire phenom that went to Stanford and obviously well for Sam. But it's amazing how many of our big league guys are late bloomers, who didn't necessarily even think about that step. They were just, scratching and clawing. Like Justin Verlander was, 86 to 89 when he went to Old Dominion. He wasn't an area code superstar.
Right.
He talks about it when I was with Team USA. We have, when they cut down the roster to 20 guys before we went to Japan for the World Cup. They cut some guys, and there's some, some teary eyes in that room. And they're like, guys, just so you know, we cut Mike Trout. Like there's a lot of really good players who have been in this room that didn't make it, but it's not the end of your baseball career. And I look back, and Alex Kirilloff was a guy that was one of the final cuts for Team USA in 2015. And I think he was the 14th overall pick in the draft the following year. Phenomenal talent for the Twins now.
Yeah.
So I look back on those, and there's so many opportunities to make up the difference if you're not the best player right now. So just be patient and be persistent.
Awesome. Eric, that was great, man. I appreciate your time. Sorry about the snafu in the beginning.
Oh, it's all good. Happy to do it anytime. Thanks for having me.
You got it. And then I'll send you some clips before I post anything.
That sounds good. Thanks for having me, Wayne. Take care, bud.
Take care.
Be safe.
All right.
Bye-bye.
You too.